The sack didn't move when the wind picked up. It just hung there, draped over her head like it had been sewn to her skin, like it belonged there. She didn't cry or flinch or shift, just stood there in the middle of the dirt road like someone had left a scarecrow behind and forgotten to make it scary. Her hands were tied in front of her. The sack had a single knot under the chin, and the rest of her, well, she was too still to tell if she was alive or dead. Eli Cartwright pulled the reins gently, slowing his wagon to a stop. The horses snorted, uneasy. The sun was low behind her, casting a long shadow his way. For a moment he didn't speak, didn't move, just watched. Then she whispered it, quiet as a breath, but the desert carried sound differently. Please, don't look under the sack. And that should have been the end of it. A warning, plain and gentle, like a dog growling low. Not to threaten, just to say don't come closer. A sane man would have turned the wagon and rode the long way around. But Eli hadn't been sane in a long time. Let's go back to where it started. The Cartwright Ranch sat 22 miles south of Bitter Creek, nestled between two hills and a thicket of cottonwoods that refused to die, no matter how many dry summers tried to kill them. Eli had lived there alone for going on 9 years, ever since the war ended and the woman he loved stopped waiting. He never remarried, never lit the second bedroom lamp. Folks in town said he spoke with ghosts or horses or worse. But every month he came into Bitter Creek with a wagon full of cedarwood and left with flour, oats, and tobacco. It was on one of those trips, a little after dusk, that he saw the girl. Not a soul around. No boot prints. No dust cloud from a wagon. Just her, in the middle of the road, standing like she'd grown up from the dirt. He climbed down slowly, not out of fear but respect. There was something unnatural about how still she was. Not dead, just resigned. "Ma'am," he said softly, tipping his hat even though she couldn't see it. "You all right?" No answer. He stepped closer. The sack was burlap, same kind folks stored grain in, and it hung low down to her collarbone. Her dress was torn at the sleeves and tied clumsily at the waist. Her hands, bound in front of her with what looked like leather lacing, were chafed and red. Still no sound. "I ain't gonna touch you. Just want to make sure you're not hurt." Then softly again, "Please, don't look under the sack." It wasn't the voice of a madwoman or a criminal. It was the voice of someone who'd been given one rule to follow and clung to it like it was life itself. Eli looked around again. Not a bird, not a wagon, not even a dust devil. Just him, the girl, and the whispering wind. He stepped back. "All right." He untied the reins from the brake post, turned the wagon gently, and backed it toward her. "You can ride in the back if you want, or walk alongside. I ain't gonna ask questions." She didn't move. He set down a folded blanket in the wagon bed, then stepped aside. 10 seconds passed, then 20. Finally, her bare feet moved. Just a shuffle. She climbed up like her bones hurt, her fingers still bound. She never turned toward him, never tried to speak again. Just sat with her knees tucked to her chest and the sack still covering her face. He drove slow, real slow, like he was hauling glass. Night fell before they reached the ranch. Coyotes howled somewhere off near the ridge. He didn't offer her food. He didn't untie her hands. And she didn't ask. When they got to the barn, he brought the horses in, lit the lantern, and turned to her. "You can stay here tonight," he said, motioning to the hay pile. "I'll leave water and a biscuit. There's a blanket too." She didn't move. "I ain't gonna take that sack off," he added. "You asked me not to. That's enough." And with that, he closed the barn door behind him. But he didn't sleep. At dawn, Eli stood outside the barn, staring at the handle. The morning was heavy with heat. No wind, no birds, just the ache in his chest that hadn't gone away since the war and the girl who waited and stopped waiting. He pushed the door open slowly. She was there, curled like a child, still wrapped in the blanket. Her hands were no longer tied. The leather lace sat coiled beside the biscuit, untouched. But it was the sack. It had shifted in the night, just a little, enough for him to see the edge of her jaw, the curve of her cheekbone, bruised purple and swollen like she'd been kicked by a mule, and a line, thin, pink, and recent. A cut, not accidental. Eli knelt. "Ma'am," he said gently, "I won't ask what happened, but if someone's still out there, looking for you." She stirred. Her fingers reached for the sack, pulled it down tighter. He reached out, just to adjust the blanket, but her whole body flinched. "I'm not gonna hurt you," he said again, voice low, "but I'd like to know your name." "Nothing." He nodded slowly, stood, and turned to leave. And that's when he heard it. A second breath. Not hers. Low, shaky, coming from behind the barn door. He froze, turned, and heard the whisper again, but not from her lips. "Please, don't look under the sack." But this time the voice came from outside, from the other side of the barn wall. Eli stepped back slowly, heart thudding. That voice hadn't come from the girl. It had come from outside. A whisper with the same words, same rhythm, same tone, like it had been repeated or practiced. The air felt heavier now, like the barn itself had started listening. He eased toward the back door of the barn, keeping his boots light. The lantern flickered on a nail behind him, casting long shadows that danced across the floorboards. Outside, the land stretched quiet and empty, nothing but prairie and sky. And then, just as he was about to step out, movement, behind the woodpile, a flicker of color, a faded shirt, a breath too loud. Eli ducked instinctively and grabbed the pitchfork by the door. Not to use, just to carry. Sometimes that was enough. He rounded the corner slow. A boy, couldn't have been more than 12, barefoot, mud up to his knees, thin and nervous with sharp eyes and a bruise under one. He stood with his hands raised halfway, caught but unsure if he needed to bolt or beg. Eli lowered the pitchfork. "You with her?" The boy looked toward the barn, then back at Eli. He didn't answer. "She's in bad shape," Eli said. "I offered her food and water. That's all." Still nothing. Eli sighed, glanced behind him, then said the words like a man testing fate. "She told me not to look under the sack." The boy's lips parted just a little, but his voice was dry, cracked. "She's not ready." That confirmed what Eli already knew. He nodded toward the porch. "You hungry?" The boy didn't move at first, then just a small step. That night, both of them ate outside. Eli gave the boy stew and didn't ask questions. The girl stayed in the barn, silent. But when Eli woke the next morning, the boy was gone. And the girl was still there, still under the sack. By the fourth day, the town started talking. It always did. Mrs. Ellis, who ran the dry goods store, had seen Eli buy more oats than usual. 2 extra loaves of bread. A pair of shoes that didn't match his boot size. And most damning of all, a spool of thread and needles. "What would a man like Eli Cartwright want with needle and thread?" she asked Sheriff Melton. "Unless he's patching up something that ain't a saddle." The sheriff rode out 2 days later. Eli was chopping wood when he arrived, sleeves rolled, sweat on his brow. The sheriff didn't dismount. "Folks say you took in a girl." Eli wiped his axe blade with a rag. "Is that against the law now?" "No, but they say she wears a sack on her head and don't talk." "That sound normal to you?" "Normal's not why she's here." The sheriff studied him. "You're not known for keeping company." "I'm not keeping company. I'm offering shelter. You know what people say." Eli didn't answer, just looked toward the barn. The sheriff followed his gaze. "If she's hurt, or if someone's after her." "They already found her," Eli said quietly. "Long before I did." The sheriff sat in silence for a while, then finally nodded. "You sure about this, Eli? You bring in heat to your own door." Eli looked down at his boots, then out at the horizon. "She asked me not to look. I reckon that means she trusts me a little. That's more than I get from most folks." The sheriff chewed the inside of his cheek, then tipped his hat. "Don't let this turn into a mess." Eli watched him ride off, watched the dust trail vanish like breath in the cold. That night, Eli sat by the barn, lantern between his boots. He spoke through the wood slats. "I had a brother once," he said quietly. "Didn't make it back from Antietam. He was the one who talked. I was the one who watched. No reply. I don't need to know what happened, but I'd like to understand what you need. A shuffle inside. Then silence. But the next morning, the blanket was folded. The biscuit was gone. And in its place, on the wooden crate where she slept, was a single thread. Black, tied in a loop. He didn't know what it meant, but it was something. A gesture. And it was enough. The next week, a rider came from town. Not the sheriff. Jacob Varnell. Owns half the cattle between here and Cross Fork. Loud. Smells like sweat and cigars. Rides a black gelding and believes there's no problem a gun or a rope can't fix. He leaned on his saddle horn and called out to Eli without getting off. You harborin' a whore or a witch, Cartwright? Folks are gettin' spooked. Eli didn't answer. I heard she walks the barn at night. Heard she's got no face. Heard you're either protectin' her or hidin' from what she did. Still no answer. Or maybe, Varnell sneered, you just finally lost it. Livin' out here with ghosts and godless girls. Eli stepped off the porch, slow. I ever hear you call her that again, he said. You'll find out which end of your mouth the Lord put truth in. Varnell's smile vanished. You think you can stand against what's comin'? Eli didn't blink. Let it come. Varnell rode off, but he'd planted the seed. That night, when Eli checked the barn, he found the girl sitting up, the sack still on, but her head tilted toward him, like she'd been listening, like she had something to say, and all she whispered was, they're coming. Eli's blood turned cold. Who? She didn't answer, but she didn't have to, because outside the barn, miles off, just barely on the wind, came the faint sound of hooves. Too many for one rider, too quiet for a friendly visit. And Eli knew, this wasn't just about her anymore. The wind shifted the long grass in waves, but it wasn't the wind Eli was listening to. It was the rhythm beneath it, slow, steady, getting closer. Hooves, dozens, not galloping but pacing, like whoever they were didn't need to rush, like they already knew where she was. Eli stood at the barn door for a long time, staring toward the southern hills. No dust trail yet, but something stirred in his gut, an old soldier's instinct, the kind that wakes you up 10 seconds before cannon fire. He turned toward her. She hadn't moved from the crate, sack still on, hands resting in her lap. I need to know who's coming, he said quietly. She flinched. I ain't asking to take the sack off, but I need to know what I'm protecting you from. The silence pressed between them, heavy and long. Then, without lifting her head, she said two words so soft he barely heard them. My brothers. Eli felt the breath leave him. How many? 4. Armed. A pause, then a nod. He rubbed a hand down his face. Why would they be looking for you? Her hands gripped the edges of her dress. Her voice came smaller this time. They sold me. It landed in the room like a bullet, sharp, quiet, final. Eli stepped back. He didn't ask what she meant. He didn't have to. In places like Bitter Creek, there were men who dealt in livestock and girls alike. Trade a wagon load of wheat for a daughter too sickly or slow to argue. They said no one would want me, she whispered. So they covered my face. Said it was better that way. Eli stared at her. Better for who? She didn't answer. But now he understood the sack. The voice. The silence. She wasn't hiding herself. She was hiding what had been done to her. Eli stepped outside the barn and walked to the porch. He lit the lantern early and left it burning. Then he sat down with his rifle and a pipe and waited for dusk to bleed out across the sky. He didn't sleep. By nightfall, the hooves stopped half a mile out. Eli knew because the dogs in the canyon below went quiet all at once. Then, just before moonrise, four shapes emerged from the dark. Riders. No torches. Just shadows and sharp movement. They didn't approach the house. They circled the barn. One called out, his voice rough, half drunk, half mad. We know she's in there, old man. Eli stood on the porch, calm, rifle in hand but barrel down. She doesn't belong to you. Another voice, younger, angrier. She's our blood. You think you can keep a Cartwright girl from her kin? She's not yours, Eli said. Not anymore. Silence. Then laughter. You got no say in what happens next. Eli's jaw tightened. I do if it happens on my land. A pause. Then hoofbeats again, this time moving toward him. The eldest of the four dismounted, walked forward into the lantern light. He had a scar across his neck and a hunting knife on his belt that looked like it had seen war. She's ours, he said. We didn't kill her. That makes her ours. That's how it works. Eli stepped off the porch. You sold her. You tied her hands. You put a sack over her head like she was ashamed to carry. That's not family. She was cursed, the brother said. Told things that weren't hers to tell. Shamed our mother, spit in our food. Daddy said she was touched in the head. Eli's voice dropped. And now, the man shrugged. Now she's property. And that was it. That was the moment something broke in Eli Cartwright. Not a loud break. Just a quiet snap in the place where decency keeps trying to hold back the flood. She's under my roof now, he said. Which means you'll leave in peace or not at all. The brother grinned, stepped back, and called out. 3 rifles lifted in the dark. Eli didn't flinch. But from inside the barn, a voice rang out. Not a whisper this time. Clear. Cracked, but strong. My name is Miriam. All 4 brothers froze. And in the silence that followed, she said it again. Miriam, that's my name. Not girl. Not cursed. Not yours. The door creaked open. Eli turned. She stepped into the lantern light, barefoot, sack still on, but standing taller than he'd seen her stand. Her hands were shaking. Her voice was not. You gave me away like a mule. You told me to stay quiet, to keep the sack on so no man would ever look at me. But he did. She turned slightly, the sack still hiding her face, and reached out blindly until her fingers touched Eli's coat. And he didn't flinch. The eldest brother stepped forward. We came to get you. That's all. No, she said. You came to make sure I stay invisible. She raised her hands and, slowly, reached for the knot under her chin. Eli touched her wrist gently. You don't have to. But she nodded. I do. She pulled the sack free. And Eli, who'd seen things most men wouldn't speak of, fell to his knees, not from horror, but from the ache of what had been done. Her face bore scars. Not 1 or 2, dozens. Tiny burns, old cuts, healed lashes. Patch over one eye, a lip that had healed uneven. But she stood without shame now. The brothers didn't laugh. They just stared, as if the truth of what they'd done had just become real in flesh. And Eli, still kneeling, whispered, You're not a thing to hide. Miriam turned toward the brothers. And the wind stopped, and the night waited. No one moved. The prairie had gone so still. Even the horses seemed confused. For brothers on horseback, a girl with scars and bare feet, and an aging rancher on his knees beneath a dim lantern glow, and nothing but silence between them. Then the youngest brother, the one who hadn't spoken yet, finally found his voice. Miriam, we didn't mean, he started, but his words collapsed under the weight of them. She didn't answer. Her face, now bare, didn't twist with rage or tremble with fear. She just looked at him, quietly, and the boy looked away. The oldest brother spat in the dirt. You think you're shaming us standing there like that? You're shaming yourself. Eli rose slowly to his feet. She's not here to shame anyone. She's here because you broke her and expected her to stay quiet. She's blood, the second brother snapped. She belongs to us. She's not livestock, Eli growled. Not something you pass off when she ain't useful. You don't know what she did. I don't care, Eli said. Whatever she did, it didn't earn her rope burns and that sack. He took 1 step forward. The eldest brother's hand drifted toward his belt, but didn't draw. Miriam didn't speak again. She turned and walked back into the barn. Not with fear, but with something stronger, something earned. And when the barn door creaked shut behind her, the lantern above Eli's porch flickered once, then held. The brothers hesitated. They weren't ready for this. They'd come expecting weakness, shame, silence. They hadn't expected to be looked in the eye. Eli stared each of them down in turn. Ride home. The eldest opened his mouth. Ride home, Eli repeated. And after a moment, after another long, unbearable silence, they did. No words. Just turned their horses, one by one, and disappeared into the night the same way they'd arrived, as shadows. Inside the barn, Miriam sat on the crate again. The sack rested in her lap now. Not like a prison, but like a piece of shed skin. Eli knelt beside her and didn't speak. She didn't either. Not at first. But then she reached down and took his calloused hand in hers. Held it like it was something fragile. They used to make me wear it when company came, she whispered. Said no man would ever want what I looked like. That I'd ruin their name if I showed my face. Eli stared ahead, his voice thick. I've known fine-looking women who never said a kind word in their lives. I've known soldiers who wore no scars on the outside and carried hell in their bones. None of it meant anything. He looked at her. You're the first one in a long time who walked through fire and came out willing to speak your name. She turned to him, something deep breaking in her eyes. They'll come back. He nodded. Maybe. But you won't be alone. She looked down at the sack again. I used to pray someone would see my face and still stay. Eli's grip tightened just slightly. I'm still here. She didn't cry. Not loudly. Just pressed her forehead to the back of his hand and breathed like a child who hadn't known what it was to be safe. And for the first time since the war, Eli Cartwright prayed. Not for forgiveness. Not for peace. But that when they came again, if they did, he'd still be strong enough to stand between her and the fire. The next week passed like a ghost. Slow, quiet, thick with waiting. Miriam stayed in the barn, but the door remained open now. Eli left coffee on a crate in the mornings. She drank it, folded the blanket each night. She still wore the sack when she walked outside, but not when she spoke to him. And then, one evening, as he returned from fixing the south fence, he saw her out by the edge of the corral. No sack, no sleeves, just sun on her scars, dust on her feet, and her eyes turned toward the horizon like she was daring it to send someone. Nice out, he asked softly. She nodded. Haven't felt wind on my skin in a long time. He leaned on the fence beside her. Town's still talking, he said. Sheriff says folks are scared. They think I'm either hiding a witch or courting one. Miriam smiled faintly. What are you doing? He glanced at her. Waiting to see what you need next. She looked down at her hands. I want to sew. He blinked. Sew? She nodded. I used to make small things. When I was allowed. The thread you found. That was a part of me I thought I could keep. I still have it, Eli said. Didn't throw it out. Miriam's voice dropped to a whisper. Then maybe I'll stay a while longer. He didn't answer, just tipped his hat. And they stood like that until the sun dipped low behind the hills, and the shadows grew long, and the wind no longer felt like a warning. 2 months passed. The grass turned brittle underfoot, and the clouds came less often, but Miriam stayed. She moved into the small room above the barn. Not because Eli asked her to, but because she wanted a place with a door she could open herself. She'd mend the fence wire in the morning and sew in the afternoons, her hands moving with quiet precision. She didn't talk much, but when she did, her voice had stopped trembling. The sack was gone now, folded and buried beneath a cedar tree out back. Neither of them had spoken when she did it. She just carried it out one dusk, knelt beside the roots, and covered it with dirt. Eli had watched from the porch, said nothing, just nodded once when she returned. They shared supper now, quiet meals. No grace, no ceremony. She'd cut vegetables while he poured coffee. Sometimes they'd talk about the cattle. Sometimes they'd say nothing at all. But the silence between them had changed. It wasn't heavy anymore. It was safe. Then, one hot morning in late July, Eli rode into Bitter Creek for supplies. The general store quieted when he entered. Mrs. Ellis watched him from behind the counter like he carried the plague. Sheriff Melton gave a nod, but didn't move from his chair. Folks had stopped asking about the girl, but their eyes still followed Eli through every aisle. He didn't care. He'd never cared less what the town thought. But as he packed flour and nails into his saddlebag, something caught his attention. A child, no older than 5, stood near the door holding a worn rag doll. She looked up at him, curious. Eli smiled gently. Her mother snatched her away like he was fire. That was the moment he knew Miriam couldn't stay here forever. Not like this. He rode home slower than usual. That evening, as they watched the sky shift orange to deep blue, he said it plain. "You should leave." Miriam didn't react at first, then turned to him. "You want me to go?" "No," he said, "but I don't want you caged here either." "I'm not. Not by me," he said, "but by what people think you are. You deserve a name again. A town that sees your hands, not your scars." She thought for a long time. The crickets had started singing. "You think I should hide again somewhere else?" "I think you should be seen," he said, "by people who see what I see." Miriam wrapped her arms around herself and stared into the dark. "I wouldn't know where to go." Eli looked at her. "Then we figure it out together." She blinked hard, like something inside her cracked open, and for the first time she said his name. "Eli." It was soft, like a prayer someone hadn't dared say aloud. He turned. "I don't want to start over," she whispered. "I just want to begin." And with that, it was decided. Not with grand speeches or teary goodbyes, just a quiet plan. A wagon built from parts in the barn. A few tools packed. The quilt she'd sewn from old shirts and hay sacks folded carefully inside. And a letter, left for the sheriff, explaining who she was, where she came from, and what her brothers had done. They didn't need revenge. They needed the truth to stop hiding. The morning she left, she wore a wide-brimmed hat and a cotton dress Eli had stitched tighter at the waist with his rough hands. He'd packed a small chest of thread and fabric scraps. She stood by the wagon with her hand on the reins. Eli didn't say much, just walked up and handed her a folded paper. "What's this?" "A map. Town 2 days south. Church, clean rooms. Lady there runs a school for deaf children. I think they'd understand scars just fine." Miriam swallowed hard. She opened her mouth, closed it, then stepped forward and wrapped her arms around his waist. He held her tighter than he'd held anything in years. "I'll write," she said. "I'll wait," he answered. The wagon creaked as it started down the path. He didn't follow, just stood by the barn and watched her shrink into the horizon, dust curling behind the wheels. The sun climbed higher, and for the first time in 9 years, Eli Cartwright felt like something had been set right in him. Not fixed, not forgotten, but healed enough. Years later, people in that southern town would speak of a scarred woman who taught children how to sew, who baked bread for families that had none, and who never once wore anything on her face but a small, quiet smile. When asked about her past, she'd simply say, "I was once left beside a road with a sack on my head and no name." Then she'd pause, glance out the window and add, "And then someone saw me and stayed."